Good day, everybody. It's Howard Redwood here, talking to you about the standards check with our webinar for today. We did actually cover this on the 17th of April and did a webinar with Olivia. Unfortunately, due to technical problems, it didn't come out properly. And we had some feedback from the candidates that were involved that in some areas of the country, it's completely froze and it didn't work. So I'm re-recording it now. I'm afraid that Olivia is not available to do this, so I'm doing this on my own. And what we will do is go through the seminar and webinar as you would have done, using the questions that were brought up on the original webinar. So here we go. And the topic is there an ideal subject to cover for your standards check? And the answer is yes, there is. And what I'll say to you now is there is one subject that we did clarify with the DVSA that they don't want people to do with, and I'll talk to you about that in just a second. So if we move on now, the things to consider is a subject that's relevant to your pupil, because remember that this is a standards check and we are here to do coaching in a client-centered way. It's supposed to be an agreement with the student as to how they move on with their development. It's not your development, it's their development we're talking about here. So the examiner is trying to see that learning takes place. And for that to take place, there has to be an agreement that your student pretty much buys in to the learning environment when they get into the car. This is set up really from the previous session, that when you leave, when you finish the previous session, that they and you agree that the next part to move on to is pretty much chronological order, and it's just development in a steady stage. You do get the situation sometimes when you come into that next session and they've completely changed their mind because they've spoken to their friends, they've spoken to mum and dad, and they want to go and do dual carriageways, but then that's your job under the risk management part of the SC1 to ensure that you bring them back to your way of thinking, but in a diplomatic way, to get them to realise an error of their ways without being condescending to them and making them feel daft. So it's what they need. It's what they have to. What's what they actually need to be able to do next in order to continue with that further development. Also consider who you take as whether they are provisional license holder or full license holder. Just ensure that what you're doing in front of the examiner is to show your skills at managing how to conduct a session in a confident and competent manner in a professional way. And they're the three things: confidence, competence, and professionalism is the way that you need to do this. The examiner doesn't want to see airs and graces, and they certainly don't want to see something that's scripted. I mean, they can tell that a mile off. And this is why the preset tests were actually done away with. It's because they wanted what the student needed instead of what the instructor wanted to do. Make sure you set the session for the experience, because if you set the session and it's really been planned to recap and it's something that the student is really coping with very well indeed, then you could possibly have the situation of where the examiner at the end of the standards check would say to you that you over-instructed, and that's not really a good situation. It's got to be where it's set at the appropriate level. And really with all this, what we're doing is making sure that you continue from what they've been working on recently and keep the standard that they need, the logical standard of what they need at the level they need it at. And some people work quicker than others. Some people have different ways of taking on information. We know about the auditory, sensory, and kinesthetic. Normally there's 2 of the 3 that people take on board. So make sure that when you plan these sessions, that you are able to excel yourself by ensuring that learning takes place by delivering the training required to the needs of that student. So if they're auditory kinesthetic or they're sensory kinesthetic, then make sure you do it the appropriate way for them so learning takes place. If they have particular issues, don't be afraid to go back and actually do a micro teach for part of the session, just to get together with the bit of a session, a bit of an objective they can't meet. So these objectives need to be what's known as smarter objectives. They've got to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and evaluated. And the last R in there in smarter is for reflection. So what you're doing is you are reflecting or recognizing and rewarding when the objective is achieved and revisiting it if it's not. So there's no reason why you can't go back into with your standards check to take your student with you where you are revisiting because part of a task or a whole task they are struggling with. If you look at a standards check sheet at the very top where it says lesson themes, you've got several headings there of junctions, town city driving, interactive with other users, dual carriageways and faster roads, defensive driving, effective use of mirrors, independent driving, rural roads, motorways, eco-safe, recapping a manoeuvre, commentary driving, recapping emergency stop, and there's a big box saying other. And what we're sort of saying on this webinar now is to start thinking outside the box. Okay, these boxes, these lesson themes that are on the standards check form does not mean that your session has to fit into one of those. That's what PSTs used to do. They used to closet you into doing a controlled session within crossroads or within junctions and emerging and approaching. That's all gone now. We have to think more laterally. We're now thinking of the student's needs. So in the other box that you've got up where it says lesson theme, that's what we're considering today. And we're going to talk about a few scenarios that you can think of. But all of the planning that you do needs to be done using the smarter objectives. Think about the area you're going to take them to. Make sure that, for instance, you can fit wherever you're going to go to in the time you've got. Now, the examiners do realise that, you go out with them, they say, well, I'd like to be back by a certain time, thereabouts. You go out and you get stuck in traffic, which is what happened on my last standards check. I got heavily stuck in traffic around the Heathrow area. And that's when you've got to think on your feet. So you've really got to have a plan B and even a plan C sometimes too. But you must have a plan B. So make sure the area you're going to take them to, come back to the smarter objectives, you're looking at relevant in that area. So make sure the area is relevant to what you're trying to train them to do, what you're trying to coach them to achieve. Remember, it's all about achievement. It's all about the student's achievement. So whenever you are talking to that student in the vehicle, everything should be we. So it's a union, it's a partnership. You're both trying to get that student to the objective of attaining a confidence and competence level to be able to take the practical driving test. They've already done their theory, well, hopefully they've done their theory, and you're trying to get them to the driving standard. So there's a lot of things to think of, there's a lot of considerations. So let's go back through this again. Consider the subject that's relevant to your pupil, not to you, to your pupil. Consider what do they need. Now, when we mean what they need, it might be someone that might need extended pedals for their car. It might be extended pedals because they're short, a cushion, anything like that. It can also, what do they need in terms of learning aids? Do you need to take pens and whiteboards? Do you need to be able, have you got to have equipment with you where you can show them this very short film, just so it can reiterate something at some point you're trying to put across? all this sort of stuff. Make sure you are prepared in a professional manner to be able to deliver this session. Are they provisional or full license holder? Are they what experience do they have? Are they a novice? Are they intermediary? Are they test standard? Make sure that any lesson preparation that you give is suited for that level of experience, but allow it to grow. So if they do get on very well with the session, you've got a plan in your head where you can move them on and stretch them a little bit more. What have they been working on recently? Well, really and truly, they should be moving on to the next step of development rather than jumping and leaping up to dual carriageways when they're not ready for it. Have they got any particular issues? It could be that they get very anxious coming up to traffic lights or roundabouts. So just bear that in mind when you're trying to go to site to do the delivery, that if they start crumbling on the way to delivery, the examiner's not going to expect you to continue with that pre-planned session that you have. They'll expect you to take to task the problems that that student is having, and that could throw the whole of your session out of sync if you are going through parts that they haven't covered before. So just work out whether you've got to drive them to a particular site or not. But again, it's going to depend on their experience. If you drive them to site and the examiner can see they're really quite experienced, then effectively you've over-instructed. So you need to be sure that where you're taking them to, they can actually get there and they can get back in as well. So think about the area. Think wider than the preset tests. There are several things you can do. You've got the lesson themes. Yes, if it does fit into one of those, fair enough. But there are other things you can do outside the box as well, which we'll come on to in just a minute. But be mindful of not choosing a subject that you want to do. That student, it's got to be in their development. So really and truly, you shouldn't be pre-planning miles ahead of what student to take. You should be able to have a set of students, or two or three, a little group of students that you could probably rely on, and say to all three of them, look, I've got a standards check coming. How do you fancy either entice them with a free session or something? And then you'll probably find one of them will probably let you down anyway. So you've always got to have a backup plan. If you're in a situation, I'll test you now for those who haven't done a standards check yet, if you are in a situation on the day and you can't take anyone to that standards check, that's a fail to attend. And that's quite serious. You must ensure you've got a student, and you must ensure you've got a backup one in case the one you wanted to take couldn't go, and obviously get your lesson plans organised for both of them. Okay, so some examples of subjects that you haven't thought of before is distractions. There's several ways we can go with those. Many students get anxious, they get nervous, and also using Satnavs, which is part of the practical test anyway. Those, we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail on these. So let's talk about distractions then. Are there things that they get distracted by? A distraction is really anything that takes them from the driving task. So whether it be something they hear, something they see, it could even be a previous experience that was a bad experience for them, and they have to overcome this. So during their sessions, you might find that they have a habit where they lose a little bit of their competence at certain aspects. And this is where you may have to micro teach to help them to get a lot more confidence to be able to overcome the distraction and find a coping strategy with it as well. So distractions is quite broad. And so breaking it down, it's no point going to the examiner and saying, I'm going to do a session on distractions. He's going to want to say, well, in what particular area are you going to do it in? And you've got to be able to break it down. This is where you've got to be able to micro teach, which is basically breaking an objective down into small component parts. Going through that with the student, praising them on the bits that they can do well, and then the bit that they can't do is where you start going into a bit more detail with them and coach them through these sort of areas. So distractions on its own is a very broad subject. So think about breaking this down by covering an aspect of distractions. So technology could be one aspect, for example. Feeling tired as a shift worker and work pressures. I mean, we're not training in this COVID-19 environment as much now, but an example could be that they have family or are working as frontline NHS, and they are worried about it, so it's distracting them from the actual driving task. So a distraction is anything that anything that distances them from the driving task. Family commitments could be another one. You know, they want to go to a party and they can't get there. And with these youngsters, with the mobile technology, there's always a fear of missing out. And so there's all sorts of things that can distract them from the driving task. Anxiety, whole load of reasons why they can be anxious. But driving in built-up areas, driving towards traffic lights, for example, coming up towards roundabouts, normally it's where they feel they haven't got control of a certain situation. So you agree a coping mechanism they can use to identify and to deal with the level so they can get control. That's what we need to do, keep them to stay into control. The way we do that is by giving them a strategy like the red, amber, green strategy. So you decide with them what red would be, what amber would be, and what green would be. So, for instance, while they're driving along, they say, right now, how are you feeling now about this? Where are we in our coping strategy? And if they say, well, I'm on the green, I'm quite happy with what I'm doing at the moment, and okay, great. Don't sit back and take their word for it. Because on the SC1 under risk management, was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupil's actions? So bear in mind, the risk management area of your SC1 doesn't just deal with the inside of the vehicle. It's dealing with the environment that the vehicle is driving through. Is your student reacting in the appropriate manner, whether it be proactions or the correct reactions for others' actions? Now, it's a bit of a mouthful, that, but that's really what it is. Is your student making appropriate proactions or reactions to others' actions? So are they timely? Are they correct? Are they thought through? Are there levels of anticipations picking up what's going on? So you have to, although they say, yeah, I can manage, they don't have the correct context of driving that you do with all your experience and training. So you've got to think, if your emotions start to curdle a bit, then they must be doing something wrong. They may not feel that. They might think that everything's all fair and dandy, and they don't get the emotional problem because they think they're doing everything really well. And this is where you have to objectively or subjectively decide on whether their green is actually green. Amber could be where you say to them, well, how are you feeling now? Yeah, I'm not sure about this roundabout. I'm not sure how to approach what lane to be in, etc. This is when, if you've got a moment and you can say to them, well, decide what lane you think you need. And then if they get it wrong, you've got to step in with some verbal intervention and guide them through if need be. If it's red and they really are in a situation where they say, I don't like this, I don't think I want to do this bit anymore, then you must pull them over as soon as you possibly can and sort everything out with them. So the coping strategy is really a process that you work out with them. It's not fail-safe, to be honest, but it's really a device that helps to let them keep control or try to keep control. It's like you sort of putting a hand on their back and cajoling them through a situation. So they've got a little bit of control, but you've got the overall control as you would do under the risk management of your SC1. So they need to understand what the red, amber and green feels like and what it means to them. So you can use different systems, but the red, amber, green tends to be a very common system to use. So moving on then, using a Satnav as another distraction. And I'm just going to give you a short story about a big organization I do a lot of fleet work for. And they had a fantastic system on their previous systems for Satnav because the directions on the Satnav were exactly as we do in the cars. at the end of the road, turn left or right. And the new system that's come into this organisation doesn't say that. It doesn't indicate and then direct. It says, take the second right. So if you're looking down the road, you might see an entrance into the shops to the right. That's the first one. And the end of the road to turn right is the second right. How distracting is that? And it's caused all sorts of grief. So when these students say to you, I'm not sure what to do about the Satnav, which is obviously not just a problem to them, but it's a distraction as well to them because they're not used to it, then the coping strategy there would be, well, look, when you're out with your parents, why don't you get them to set the Satnav, even if they know where they're going, and you sit in the passenger seat and just listen to it. You know where you're going to go, but listen to what the directions are. So you can start to formulate what to expect the Satnav to tell you to do. Also, if we don't know how to set it, quite often these things come with a bit of a booklet, and just say to them, well, look, hang on, that booklet might not all be relevant to you. There could be 5 other languages in there as well. Because some people get very put off when they see a thick book, think, oh, goodness sake, have I got to read all that? And if they're sensory kinesthetic, then they're not going to read anything at all because they want to see and not read. So if you can explain very quickly to them exactly how to set up the process and deal with that, there's no reason why you can't do that as part of a standards check. Obviously, you won't do the whole lot, but you could probably incorporate that into distractions. No reason why you can't. No reason why you can't think out the box. You need to find out what the issue is with it, though. There's no point trying to go through the whole session, trying to explain to the Satnav. That won't do. It's going to be the part of that device that they do not understand that you would have to go through and then incorporate that into something else. Setting up in the car, obviously making sure it's in the appropriate position so it's not in a line of sight where it shouldn't be. Programming routes, understanding the display, understanding verbal instructions, which you just mentioned, and driving and using a sat-nav at the same time needs a little bit of coordination sometimes. Whenever we do training in fleet, we say we don't want you to look at the sat-nav, we want you to listen to it. Only look at it when it's stationary, when the vehicle's stationary, so you don't take your eyes off the road. Okay, so what we'll do is move on now. We usually find we learn more from the questions that actually come up at the end when people have the nagging doubts and the nagging feeling, and they say, well, what about this? You haven't covered this bit for me, and you haven't covered that bit for me. I've mentioned risk management because that when I do training, I usually get the risk management thing come up. So how do we deal with risk management? If you're dealing with a full license holder, you must ensure that you've done a risk assessment with them before you go to the examiner. That can be done days before and as a session before, and then you discuss what needs to be done, and then recap that with the examiner actually on site at the time, and then that can be your session for the standards check, and then it can be a session where it's then going through sort of only 3 or 4 objectives. That's all. When you're doing that, the examiner will start looking to see how you're then controlling the session and whether you're over and instructing, etc., and letting the full license holder get on with things. So when it comes to the fleet, the risk management of that, always ensure you've done the risk assessment prior to the session. The examiner will not be too pleased to be sitting in the back with you sitting there saying nothing while you're watching someone drive and then trying to do the whole session afterwards. It just doesn't work. It goes down as bad planning. Okay, so I've got Tom helping me today. Tom's looking after all the questions. So thank you, Tom, for that. He's been sitting in the background, being very quiet and very, very patient. So Tom, have you got some questions for me there?
Yes, of course, yeah. First one is, if taking a recently passed full license holder, how would I demonstrate that learning has taken place?
Well, learning taking place can be done by scaling. The first thing you can do is say to them at the beginning, where do you think you sit with this as a scale of 1 to 10? And then when the session is done, what you can then do is ask them again what they think it is, but always tell them what you think the figure is as well. And hopefully you'll be about the right ballpark. But remember, we were talking about our smarter objectives. So the last R is the reflection. That's at the end when you say to them, you know, how do you think you've done? Where do you think we need to work on for next time? If that evaluation comes to a point where it has to be revisited, then that's where you start at the next time. So that's how you do that.
Okay. The next one is it possible to do a Pass Plus session?
If you're Pass Plus registered as an instructor, yes, it is. Obviously, you can't do a night drive. You'd have to pick what you can do, but it is possible to do motorways and dual carriageways and the town driving and the country road driving. Just be mindful of the time that you've got to do this in. There's no reason at all. It's also possible as well for guys anybody, if you find that when you do your objectives of your session and the students get on really well, especially when you're driving around the town, there's no reason why you can't move them into the elements that you would put into a Pass Plus session to stretch them a bit. I mean, you can't sign them off as a module, but only Pass Plus registered instructors can give a Pass Plus session because they have to sign it off as a Pass Plus module. So yes, it is possible to do that. Yes.
Okay, and leading on from that one, how would you register to be able to do the Pass Plus? Is there extra training after your Part 3, or is it done a different way?
No, it's not extra training. What it is, you apply to the DVSA, Integrated Register of Driver Trainers, I think it comes under, and I think the cost of a Pass Plus package is I think it's about £39. I think it is now. You apply for that, and there's quite a big comprehensive manual in the package that comes to you, and that explains exactly what the modules are and how they should be covered and carried out. And there's also a lot of information and booklets to give out to the students, and the forms that everything is registered on, and where all has to be sent back to for the candidate to get their certificate.
Okay. Someone's also asked if they could do a commentary session.
Yeah, they can do, as long as it meets the smarter objectives and is relevant to what is required. If it's going to help with anticipation, then the session should really be an anticipation session rather than a commentary session. So they're looking further down the road. It could be use of mirrors and looking further down the road, a better observation, rather than putting it down as a commentary session. I know that is one of the things that's on the SC1 form, but I would incorporate it into something else as well. If I was doing that as a standards check, I'd have that as part of my standards check and not as the whole subject.
Okay. Someone's also asked, how could I avoid taking responsibility from the full license holder and involve the pupil with more Q&A to help them analyse their learning?
I don't quite understand that question. You need to repeat that again, please. Sorry.
I think they're asking, how can I avoid taking responsibility from the full license holder if you were to take one of them on?
Well, if you're going to go on a standards check with the full license holder, you need to you must still do the risk assessment. I mean, that's the only way you're going to be able to leave the responsibility with the full license holder. So if you come to some agreement that, for instance, they are driving too fast for junctions, then you would micro-teach that possibly. It's not that you teach it, but appreciate with the full license holder, they have got experience. And so you must allow them to use that experience and show what confidence and competence they've got with the vehicle. Again, it comes down to emotion. If you feel something is wrong, then you have to address whatever it is they're doing wrong. But you don't just let them drive round. You do have to monitor what they do and give praise and talk to them. And again, it's really discussing with them how they feel about their drive and looking at the parameters, or look at the way that they might start to scheme on levels of safety. For instance, driving too close to parked cars could be one thing. They might think it's okay because there's never ever been a problem before. They've never had an incident, but you know that they sort of shave that level of safety anymore. If anyone does open up the door at the speed they're passing that vehicle, then there's a problem. So the responsibility is still with you in that vehicle, even though they're a full license holder, because although they are the full license holder, they're in charge of the vehicle. You're not, but as you're supervising them, you have got a duty of care to ensure that vehicle goes through that environment at the correct speed, at the correct time.
Okay. Someone's also asked, once the lockdown is finished, is it possible that the DIA provide in-car video recording of sample?
Yeah, we've actually been talking about this in the office for a couple of weeks, to be honest, and think this is quite useful to do, where we will get, once the lockdown is done, we will do several scenarios of, there'll have to be role play involved in this, unfortunately, which we know we don't like doing role play anymore now because PSTs have now been put to bed. But it would have to be a role play thing which is relevant to the problems we find in check tests that come up quite regularly, where we can start putting into the video exactly how it should be broached by the trainer and the outcome that an examiner would be looking at in terms of what parts of the standards are not being met. And this will take quite some time to do. It won't be an overnight thing. And we would like to do about half a dozen of those if we can. We are going to actually try, well, let's talk about trying to get the DVSA involved in that as well, so that they can play a big part in it, so we get it really from the horse's mouth as to how that would be marked and assessed. That's going to take some time to do that. So that's going to take a little bit of planning, because the DVSA, they can't do things at a drop of a hat. We have to organise that with the DVSA at Nottingham, and it sometimes take a number of months for it to get ready.
Okay. Someone's also asked if you couldn't make standards.
I'm sorry, Tom, you broke up. I didn't get that.
The question was, what would happen if my pupil couldn't make the standards check?
It goes down as if you don't turn up with anybody at all, the examiners do not do role play anymore, and therefore, if you don't turn up with a pupil and you fail to attend, that is one of your attempts gone for your standards check, and there is that's quite bad, because you've only got 3 attempts of doing this, and it starts to go into like a discipline type thing if you're not careful. So with this organising your own standards check, you've got to make sure you've got at least 1 or 2 people in plan that will be able to turn up on the day with you. Obviously, you only take 1, but you've got to have 1 or 2 irons in the fire.
Okay. And then also, is it possible to apply for a standards check if you wanted to improve your score?
Not at the moment, you can't. There's been a lot of planning by the DVSA. They've been making noises like this for a long time, well over a year and a half now, to say that they would like to make that a service. But at the moment, the system doesn't have the scope to do that, and therefore they can't do it just at the moment. But there is plans. They are thinking about it. It's very, very prevalent in their mind of wanting to do that.
Okay. Yeah, that's
okay. So support@driving.org is the place for help and advice for standards checks and anything you need to do with ADI matters. That's myself, Olivia, and on a lot of cases it's Karen as well. So if you need to get hold of us, support@driving.org is where to go for that. We're also on the end of a phone as well. We can be put through to where we'll listen to your questions and answer them. We can do it over the phone, email, or a video call if need be. and we can arrange weekly calls if we've got if you've got a severe problem with something that you need going through. We can come back and sort of revisit it for a couple of weeks. Learning materials and content is all available with the DIA as well, which can be got through the shop. We can also discuss with you which are the best ones to get hold of and discuss any other support that you need. Let me move this on. So we have also got some of the seminars, etc., available on the Academy. You can also talk to the DIA ADI help desk, but you can see the diaacademy.co.uk for all the course information, and you can book with us for other things as well on the number below there. Thank you for attending. I'd like you all to keep safe. I know we're taking some time out of your day, but our website driving.org has the updates and news for things that are taking place now, and also to do with coronavirus, etc. at this stage. And but check out the online training centre, which is reasonably new, at the diaacademy.co.uk, and that will there help you with further CPD. Okay, thank you very much indeed for attending, and we'll speak to you again. There'll be another webinar for you next week. Take care then. Bye-bye.